Today we're doing a day in the life review of the iPhone 11 in 2024. So I'm going to go through a typical day of activities while using the phone, taking some photos and videos on the phone, and keeping an eye on the battery percentage throughout the day. All while we discuss the iPhone 11 to give you an idea of what it's like using this phone in 2024. So the iPhone 11 was originally released back in fall 2019, and it features a 6.1-inch LCD display with aluminum sides and a glass back design with two 12-megapixel main and ultra-wide cameras, which is largely the same overall design format that every standard-tier iPhone generation since has followed. The most noticeable design change between the iPhone 11 and the iPhone 12 and newer is the more rounded design that the iPhone 11 features, in contrast with the much more squared-off, flat-edge design that the newer iPhones have. But the same display size and overall layout is the same for every iPhone generation since the iPhone 11 at first glance. The iPhone 11 is powered by the Apple A13 processor with 4 gigs of RAM, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that this phone still performs incredibly well in 2024, as for the past 6 years or so, Apple has done a great job future-proofing their silicon processors to remain fast and responsive long-term. The main factor that you should consider, though, if you're about to buy an older iPhone model like this, is the more limited lifespan in terms of major software update support long-term. This phone is definitely nearing the end of its lifespan for major software update support, which we'll talk more about the meaning of in a little bit. This phone has okay battery performance. It's not great, but it'll probably be passable for most users. Again, we will be checking in on the battery percentage throughout the day. And for those curious, it has a 3110 milliamp hour battery. The iPhone 11's cameras take very good looking photos that hold up impressively well even against all the newer iPhone generations that have been released since. The iPhone 11's cameras were actually a big step up from all the previous iPhone generations before it, which has definitely helped it to stand the test of time as good as it has. For those curious, the iPhone 11's 12 megapixel main camera lens has an f1.8 aperture, and its 12 megapixel ultra wide lens has an f2.4 aperture. And while we're on the topic of cameras, as usual, we're going to head over to the park to take some more photos and videos on the iPhone 11 and all of the newer iPhones for comparison. So once again, the iPhone 11's cameras hold up impressively well against all the newer iPhone generations, with no shockingly noticeable differences. And of course, while Apple does continue to improve the camera with each new generation of the iPhone, I'd say the biggest improvement came this past generation with the iPhone 15, where Apple upgraded the main camera lens to 48 megapixels as opposed to the 12 megapixel lens on all the previous generation iPhones here, resulting in the iPhone 15 outputting 24 megapixel shots as opposed to the 12 megapixel shots that all the previous iPhones output. And this results in sharper image quality, which is most noticeable when zooming in on a photo you've already taken. But the quality of the images from every iPhone that I'm showing on the screen right now is going to be more than enough for the average person, the iPhone 11 included here. It is always nice to see these improvements over the years though. And here's a digital 2x photo taken on the iPhone 11 all the way through the 14, and the iPhone 15 can actually now take optical 2x photos thanks to that 48 megapixel camera lens we were just talking about. And the absolute maximum digital zoom for photos on the iPhone 11 all the way through to the 14 is 5 times, while the max digital zoom for photos on the newest iPhone 15 is 10 times, once again thanks to that new 48 megapixel camera lens. But this is yet again another example of up until the latest iPhone 15 that was just released last year, the 11 all the way through the 14 have had the same max digital zoom. And here's a front-facing photo taken with all these iPhones, and I gotta tell you, they all look fantastic, not noticing much of a difference here. And for those curious, the iPhone 11 has a 12 megapixel front-facing camera with an f2.2 aperture. And here's some video footage from all these iPhones, all shot at 4K 60 frames per second. And for typical day-to-day video recording like this, I'm not noticing any major differences here, and it really speaks to how well the camera system on the iPhone 11 has aged over the past 5 years. And the absolute maximum digital zoom for video on the iPhone 11 all the way through to the 14 is 3 times, and the maximum digital zoom for videos on the latest iPhone 15 is 6 times. And here's some 4K 60 frames per second video shot with the front-facing camera on all these devices as well. Absolutely nothing to complain about here. They'll all do you perfectly fine for your video calls or front-facing videos. So I really have nothing but good things to say about the cameras on the iPhone 11. They have performed incredibly well from the day that the iPhone 11 was released all the way up until now. So next, we're going to head on over to the coffee shop as usual to knock out some work. I have around 3.5 hours of work to do, and midway through this time working, I did take a 30-minute social media break using the iPhone 11, browsing Instagram and Twitter. And a quick battery check after this, we're currently sitting at 70%. And in a few minutes, we're going to head outside to take some nighttime photos on the iPhone 11 and all of the newer iPhone generations. But before we do that, I want to talk about the overall overall value of the iPhone 11 in 2024, the price, and where you can buy it. So you can generally get a good used iPhone 11 64GB unlocked for around $180 to $210 on eBay, Amazon, or other used marketplaces. And in my opinion, it is a pretty solid value, as it has very good cameras, a nice full-size 6.1-inch display, and it runs smoothly on the latest iOS 17 software. Battery life isn't great, but it's passable, and the phone just overall works quite well in 2024. However, as is always the case when buying older used iPhones, the big downside is the much shorter lifespan you'll get when it comes to major software update support. For context, Apple typically gives each iPhone processor chip around 6 or so years of major software update support, and the iPhone 11 and the A13 processor powering it are already on their 5th major iOS update with iOS 17, so this phone is very likely nearing the end of its lifespan for major software updates. The iPhone 11 will probably get one more major software update, which is going to be iOS 18 this fall. It's possible that it'll get iOS 19, but it's not very likely, and in terms of any major software updates beyond that, I would be very surprised. Of course, you can still use an iPhone for years after it doesn't get the latest iOS updates, but the experience starts to worsen over time as you'll become out of sync with other people in the Apple ecosystem using the latest iOS features, some of which may become commonly used by many people, and you sadly won't be able to use them. But for a full-sized iPhone that you can get for under $200, some drawbacks, like a much shorter lifespan for software updates, is to be expected when you're paying so much less than you'd pay for a newer iPhone. Now, just as a side note, in my opinion, the overall best value used iPhone you can buy right now is the iPhone 13, which you can get for around $350 to $380 on used marketplaces, as I think it's the perfect balance of being new enough to have a long lifespan ahead of it with at least 3, possibly 4 more years of major software update support thanks to the A15 processor powering it, but it's also a few years old, resulting in a pretty solid price in the used market. But chances are, if you're considering buying the iPhone 11 here at $200, the iPhone 13 around the $350 mark is probably a bit over budget. A better option than the iPhone 11 in the used market that's much closer in price to the iPhone 11 is the one generation newer iPhone 12, which you can get for around $230 to $260 on used marketplaces. And if you can spend that little bit of extra money to get the iPhone 12 instead of the iPhone 11, I think you should, as you'll be getting a one generation newer A14 processor that'll probably get 2 to 3 more years of major software update support in comparison to the 1 to 2 you'd be getting with the iPhone 11. You also get a better OLED display that has better contrast ratios and deeper black levels than the LCD display on the iPhone 11, and you get the newer flat-edged design that looks more modern. All this being said though, there's always going to be a slightly better phone that you can get for a little bit more money than the one that you're considering, and depending on your budget, you kind of always have to draw the line somewhere, as you'll slowly work your way up the ladder until you're paying way more than you originally intended to. So considering this, the iPhone 11 is a solid buy at $200 or a little less. Now, another possibility at the same $180 to $210 price range that the iPhone 11 is at is the iPhone SE 3rd Gen used. And what makes this phone compelling is that it has the A15 processor, which will get at least 3, possibly 4 more years of software update support. But I don't recommend most people buy this phone because it has a very small, by today's standards, 4.7-inch display, not very good battery life, and a pretty outdated iPhone 8 style design. So as much as the iPhone SE 3rd Gen has better longevity than the iPhone 11, the overall experience is just worse. So if you're looking to buy a used iPhone around this price range, I'd go for the iPhone 11 or iPhone 12. And something else you should definitely know when buying any used iPhone is the battery health capacity of the iPhone you're buying. As always, the battery performance of any device will vary quite a bit depending on the condition of the battery in every specific device, depending on the level of battery degradation. Just to let you know, the iPhone 11 we're using in this video is at 100% battery health capacity. This is a device that I have dedicated for review purposes, so it hasn't been put through that many charge cycles, but most iPhone 11s circulating in the wild will not have 100% battery health capacity, as most of them have probably been put through a decent amount of charge cycles over the years. I'd only recommend buying a used iPhone if the battery health capacity is around 90% or higher to ensure you're getting a device with somewhere close to the full battery capacity. You can find this info in the listing for many used iPhones, and if it's not there, I'd recommend asking the seller. So here's a photo taken with night mode on the iPhone 11 all the way through to the iPhone 15, and also here's a photo taken in the same environment without night mode on as well. So as you can see, night mode certainly makes quite a big difference on all of these iPhones, helping brighten up the shot. And the iPhone 11's night mode still holds up quite well against all the newer iPhone generations. I'm not seeing a whole lot of difference between any of these photos. But alright, after heading home and changing into some comfortable clothes, for the next hour I streamed music from the iPhone 11 to my AirPods using Spotify while organizing some files on my computer. After that, I knocked out another 2 hours or so of work, and I did take a 20-minute social media break in the middle of that, once again using Instagram and Twitter. And next up, as usual, I want to run a 20-minute FaceTime call test just to get an idea of how much battery consumption that will consume. So I'm just going to call another iPhone that I have here and let it run for 20 minutes. And going into it, we're at 54%. And checking in exactly 20 minutes later, we're sitting at 45%. So we dropped to 9% in a 20-minute FaceTime call. Definitely keep in mind that this will vary considerably based on a bunch of factors like your screen brightness, any background processes that are running on the phone, the temperature of the room you're in, as I said earlier, the battery health capacity of your device, and just a host of other things. This just serves as a very light point of reference. And for the next 45 minutes or so, I used the phone to look at some emails using Gmail and also to watch some YouTube shorts. And I capped off the night, as usual, with 1 hour of YouTube video streaming to my AirPods from the iPhone 11. So guys, as you've seen throughout this video, at the price point of $200 or less, the iPhone 11 offers a pretty good iPhone experience in 2024. The two major weak points of the iPhone 11 in 2024 are longevity in terms of major software update support going forward and mediocre battery life. But again, at the $200 or less price point, compromises like not so great longevity and okay battery life are to be expected. I will say though, if you're looking for a used iPhone around the $200 price point, if you could spend a little bit more than that, I would recommend going for the iPhone 12 used instead of the iPhone 11, which you could again get for around $230 to $260, so a little bit more. But the iPhone 12 will likely be a better investment long term, as it'll get more major software update support than the iPhone 11 will get later down the road. But again though, you can always work your way up the ladder by, going for a slightly better, slightly more expensive phone. So you have to draw the line somewhere, and at the end of the day, the iPhone 11 does again offer a solid value of $200 worth of iPhone in 2024. And final battery check at the end of the day, we're sitting at 22%. Of course, this will entirely depend on how you use your device and how much you use your device. I consider myself to be a pretty moderate phone user for the most part, and I'd say this is below average battery performance in the context of current modern iPhone generations, I mean. But again, this is what I'd expect out of a device that's 5 years old, like the iPhone 11 here. Once again though, you should definitely keep in mind that battery performance entirely depends on the condition of the battery in your specific device. So if you are using an iPhone 11 that has a battery health considerably lower than 100%, expect worse battery life than this. And guys, that just about wraps it up for this video. As usual, let me know your thoughts on the iPhone 11 in 2024 in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. And of course, as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.